He was 28 years old, dressed in black, face painted in white, standing under the hot lights of a cheap apartment set in Wilmington, North Carolina. The cameras were rolling. The crew was tired. The scene was simple: a gunshot, a fall, then cut. Brandon Lee had done this 1,000 times in his head. He had grown up watching his father cheat death on screen, survive impossible fights, walk away from explosions, and turn violence into poetry. Now, finally, this was his moment, his own movie, his own legend, his own name on the poster. The film was called The Crow, a dark comic book revenge story about a man murdered with his fiancée who returns from the dead to make the world pay. On that night in March 1993, Brandon was filming the scene where his character, Eric Draven, is shot to death on the eve of his wedding. It was supposed to be fiction. It was supposed to be choreography, blanks, squibs, and careful angles. Instead, a real .44 caliber bullet, or what might as well have been one, was waiting inside the barrel of a prop revolver. Earlier in the shoot, the production had improvised dummy cartridges by stripping live rounds, then later switched to blanks for scenes with muzzle flash. Somewhere in that process, a fragment stayed behind. No one checked the barrel closely enough. No licensed firearms expert was standing over the weapon that night. Rolling. The actor playing the thug raised the gun. The shot went off. At first, nobody moved. The sound man listened for the director's voice. The cameraman kept focus, waiting for the fall. But Brandon didn't fall the way he was supposed to. He crumpled, clutching his abdomen, not his chest. He didn't hit his mark. He didn't speak his last line. People laughed nervously, thinking he was improvising. Then they saw the blood soaking through his shirt, the way his body refused to respond, the way his eyes started to cloud. Someone finally screamed for an ambulance. Brandon Lee was rushed from the set with an open wound in his stomach and a piece of metal lodged near his spine. He would spend 6 hours on an operating table before doctors quietly accepted what Hollywood still refuses to believe. Bruce Lee's only son was dead. By dawn, the headlines were already forming. A cursed movie, a tragic accident, history repeating itself. In the days that followed, the official story would be simple: an on-set mishap, a horrible but explainable chain of mistakes with prop ammunition. But around that simple narrative, a darker fog began to spread. Crew members gave conflicting accounts. Safety procedures sounded more like shortcuts. The bullet in Brandon's body raised more questions than answers. And looming over everything was a whisper Hollywood still hasn't shaken off. Was this just bad luck? Or was there really a curse on the Lee family? This is not just the story of a movie star who died before the film could be finished. It's the story of a child growing up in the shadow of a legend, a man fighting to become his own name, a love story that was 17 days away from a wedding in Mexico, and a single shot that changed how the world looks at guns, sets, and the price of a perfect scene. Hollywood called it an accident. The audience called it a tragedy. But the truth about Brandon Lee's final night has never stopped haunting anyone who looks too closely. Before the world knew him as the Crow, Brandon Lee was simply a boy trying to survive the weight of a last name that did not belong to ordinary people. He was born in 1965 in Oakland, California. The same year his father, Bruce Lee, was fighting to break Hollywood's racial barriers. Brandon's earliest memories were not of playgrounds or birthday parties. They were of film sets, martial arts studios, and a father treated as both a genius and a threat. While most children learned how to walk, Brandon learned how to dodge cameras. While others memorized school lessons, he memorized the way his father's face changed when executives told him he wasn't American enough to lead a movie. Then when Brandon was only 8 years old, tragedy struck like a lightning bolt. Bruce Lee died suddenly at 32. A global icon vanished overnight. And Brandon, the little boy who used to sit quietly in the corner of his father's training hall, became the heir to a myth he never asked for. From that moment, people stopped seeing him as Brandon Lee. They saw him as Bruce Lee's son, a symbol, a continuation, an unfinished story they expected him to complete. Reporters asked about his father more than about him. Casting directors wanted the next Bruce, not a new face. Even martial arts schools whispered that Brandon's destiny was already written, but Brandon resisted it. He once said, "I'm not my father, I'm me. I want to build something on my own." And he tried. He tried so hard. He studied acting, not martial arts. He dyed his hair dark, wore leather jackets, listened to punk rock. He deliberately avoided playing kung fu roles, fearing he would spend his life being compared to a ghost. Yet the world never stopped comparing. Every punch he threw, every expression he made, every audition he walked into, he carried the burden of a legend he loved deeply, but did not want to imitate. Brandon once confided to a friend, "The hardest part of being Bruce Lee's son is that people forget I'm grieving too." Behind the public fascination was a young man haunted by the same questions the world asked. Why did his father die so suddenly? Why were so many details unclear? And why, as he grew older, did he feel destiny dragging him down the same dark corridor? But despite the pressure, something extraordinary happened. Brandon found his voice, not as a martial artist, but as an actor with depth, vulnerability, sensitivity, and raw cinematic presence. People began to notice him for who he truly was. Directors saw potential, studios saw charisma, fans saw a future star. And then came the script that would change everything. The Crow, a character broken by tragedy, a man resurrected by pain, a role no other actor could have embodied better. For the first time, Brandon felt the world shifting. Hollywood wasn't calling him Bruce Lee's son anymore. They were calling him Brandon Lee, the next big thing. By the early 1990s, Brandon Lee had finally begun carving out a space that was his, not his father's. The industry, once hesitant and dismissive, was starting to recognize what those close to him had always known. He wasn't just the son of Bruce Lee. He was a magnetic, intuitive, emotionally rich performer in his own right. But Hollywood does not open its doors easily. Brandon had endured years of B-movies, underfunded action flicks, and scripts that relied more on his martial arts pedigree than on his actual talent. He took them because he had to, not because he believed they defined him. And then in 1992, a script appeared, a strange, dark, poetic comic book adaptation that seemed to reach into Brandon's own life and pull out every buried emotion. The Crow, a story about love, death, injustice, and a man who returns from the grave to right the wrong done to him and the woman he loved. A role that required not muscle, but soul. A role that demanded vulnerability, grief, rage, tenderness, all the things Brandon carried quietly within him. When he read the script, he reportedly said, "This is it. This is the one. This is where I become who I'm meant to be." From the first screen test, everyone on set knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. The producers whispered that he had leading man gravity. The director said Brandon's presence was too powerful for the frame. Crew members later recalled moments where Brandon performed emotional scenes so intensely that even seasoned camera operators had tears in their eyes. He wasn't imitating Bruce Lee. He wasn't fighting to escape the shadow. He was becoming a star, on his own terms. The physical transformation was equally striking. The long black hair, the white face paint streaked with pain, the leather coat that would become iconic. In costume, Brandon radiated something almost supernatural. He was beautiful, tragic, magnetic, a perfect embodiment of the graphic novel's Dark Angel. Word spread quietly around the studio system. Brandon Lee was about to blow open Hollywood. The Crow could be his Batman, his The Terminator, his breakout into superstardom. One producer later said, he had the talent of a dramatic actor and the physicality of an action star. That combination is extremely rare. But beyond fame, Brandon had something else at stake. He was 17 days away from marrying the love of his life, Eliza Hutton. He was talking about starting a family. He told friends he finally felt at peace, a phrase he had never used before. The shoot was grueling, yes. Low budget, long nights, unsafe working conditions that everyone complained about but nobody fixed. Yet Brandon never lost patience. He carried the production on his shoulders, believing the film would be his masterpiece. The moment he stepped out of the past and into a future he had built himself. He could feel the breakthrough coming. The crew felt it too. Hollywood was finally ready for him. For Brandon, not the son, not the shadow, but the star. He just didn't know that the role destined to make him immortal was also the role that would kill him. By late March 1993, The Crow was nearing its final stretch. The crew was exhausted. Budgets were tight. Safety complaints were piling up. What should have been Brandon Lee's breakthrough was slowly turning into a production plagued by rushed decisions, cut corners, and eerie accidents that made some crew members whisper the word curse long before tragedy struck. But no one believed anything truly catastrophic could happen. After all, Hollywood used prop guns every day. What could go wrong? Everything. The scene. It was supposed to be simple. Brandon's character, Eric Draven, walks into his apartment. A gang member fires at him. He collapses dramatically. The beginning of the film's tragic transformation. Cameras roll, blanks fire, squibs explode, actors fall, directors yell cut, routine, predictable, safe. Yet on the night of March 31st, 1993, nothing about that gun was safe. The gun that never should have been there earlier during production. The team ran out of dummy rounds, the inert cartridges used for close-up shots. Instead of ordering proper props, they improvised by modifying live rounds, removing the gunpowder, but leaving the bullet head intact. When one of those makeshift dummy rounds was fired previously, the primer was strong enough to push a bullet tip into the barrel and leave it there. No one checked the barrel afterwards. No licensed firearms expert was supervising the weapon. And on the night Brandon filmed his death scene, the gun was loaded with blanks, powerful enough to fire any object lodged in the barrel like a real projectile. This was a fatal combination. A stuck, real bullet tip, please, a blank round, quoting a live shot. The moment everything changed, Brandon stepped onto the set wearing his now iconic black coat and face paint. He was prepared for another long night. The director called for action. The actor playing the gang member raised the .44 Magnum. He pulled the trigger, a deafening blast, a flash of light. And then something wrong, terribly wrong. Brandon didn't fall the way he was supposed to. He staggered. His body folded. He collapsed onto the ground, clutching his abdomen, gasping for air. At first, the crew thought he was acting. He was known for improvising emotional beats. But then the pool of blood spread too quickly. His lips turned pale. His eyes lost focus. Someone screamed, "Call 911! He's been shot for real!" The panic chaos consumed the set. People froze. Others cried. The director kept shouting Brandon's name. One makeup artist fainted when she saw the wound. A production assistant kept repeating, "It's a blank, it's a blank. How is he bleeding?" But nobody had answers. Not then. Not ever completely. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Brandon had already lost a frightening amount of blood. He was rushed to New Hanover Regional Medical Center. For 6 hours, surgeons fought to save him. They removed bullet fragments. They repaired torn organs. They tried everything. At 1:04 a.m., the doctor stepped away from the operating table and whispered the words that would break Hollywood. Time of death, March 31st, 1993. Brandon Lee is gone. He was 28 years old, 17 days away from his wedding, on the brink of becoming the next great Hollywood icon. The questions that refused to die in the aftermath, confusion turned into suspicion. Why were there no licensed weapons experts on set? Why did a real bullet fragment exist at all? Why were safety protocols ignored? Why did some crew members give contradictory statements? Why did others abruptly leave the production after the incident? Why did medical reports not fully match initial accounts? Why did the death of Bruce Lee also contain unexplained inconsistencies? For many, this was more than an accident. It was a pattern, a tragedy echoing across generations. Hollywood called it misfortune. Others called it negligence. Fans called it destiny. But everyone agreed on one thing: Brandon Lee should still be alive. The morning after Brandon Lee died, Hollywood woke to a nightmare it couldn't easily explain or erase. A rising star was gone. A film set had become a crime scene, and every headline carried the same impossible question. How does a real bullet end up in a prop gun on a professional movie set? The official response came quickly, too quickly for many observers. Authorities labeled the death an accident, the result of a chain of negligence. But the details were far from clean. The investigation that left more questions than answers. Detectives examined the gun. They interviewed the props crew. They reconstructed the ammunition timeline. And the deeper they went, the stranger the inconsistencies became. No certified weapons master was supervising the firearm on the night of the shooting. Dummy rounds had been made in-house, not professionally sourced. The bullet tip found in Brandon's spine should never have been anywhere near a movie set. Crew members disagreed on when the gun was last checked, or whether it had been checked at all. Some members of the props department quietly left the production within hours of Brandon's death, never to speak publicly again. The coroner's report confirmed that Brandon died from a .44 caliber projectile, effectively a real bullet, but the investigation never conclusively identified who loaded the gun that night, or why standard protocols were ignored so blatantly. It felt less like a solved case and more like a file closed for convenience. The studio's response: damage control over truth. The production company became laser-focused on one priority: finishing The Crow. Delays were expensive. Insurance complications were mounting. Executives worried the film would collapse if the narrative shifted towards scandal or blame, so they pushed a single storyline to the press: a tragic accident, unforeseen and unavoidable. Behind closed doors, however, lawsuits emerged. Brandon's family filed a wrongful death suit. Several crew members were named. Some settled quietly. No one went to jail, and no individual was ever held criminally responsible. The tragedy was absorbed, sanitized, and filed away as Hollywood's darkest accident, even as its unanswered questions continued to echo. The shadow of Bruce Lee. Is there a curse? For millions around the world, Brandon's death was more than a tragic coincidence. It felt like a sinister repetition. Bruce Lee died at 32. Brandon Lee died at 28. Both died in the middle of major career breakthroughs. Both deaths contained conflicting accounts and unexplained details. Both shocked Hollywood and Asia alike. Both felt impossibly premature. And then came the eerie parallels that became part of pop culture lore. In Bruce Lee's final film, Game of Death, his character is shot by a prop gun during a movie scene, almost the exact scenario that would kill Brandon years later. Fans began whispering, the Lee family curse, predestined tragedy, a violent legacy repeating itself. It was superstition, yes, but it was a superstition fueled by real fear and by Hollywood's long history of ignoring uncomfortable truths. The impact on Hollywood, a wake-up call. Brandon's death forced the film industry to confront the recklessness of its own shortcuts. Gun protocols were rewritten. Licensed weapons masters became mandatory. Studios banned improvised ammunition. Safety briefings became standard before firearm scenes. Productions finally understood that one moment of negligence could kill a rising star. Nearly 3 decades later, the tragedy remained relevant, and in 2021, the accidental shooting on the set of Rust reignited the debate. Reporters once again invoked Brandon's name, proof that Hollywood had still not fully learned the lessons his death should have taught. Grief and the woman left behind. But the deepest wound belonged to one person: Eliza Hutton, Brandon's fiancée. They were 17 days from their wedding. Wedding invitations had already been sent. Friends later said Brandon had never been happier, never felt more certain about his future. Instead, Eliza found herself planning a funeral instead of a marriage. She stayed silent for decades, guarding Brandon's memory, refusing to turn tragedy into spectacle. Her grief became one of the quietest, most heartbreaking footnotes in Hollywood history. The world lost a star. She lost the love of her life. And so the legend of Brandon Lee transformed. From a promising actor into a symbol of Hollywood's carelessness, of a family marked by tragedy, of a future stolen too soon. When Brandon Lee died, Hollywood lost more than a rising talent. It lost a future it never got to witness. A career that was about to explode, a star who was finally stepping out from under a myth and into his own light. But in the years that followed, something extraordinary happened. Brandon became bigger than the life he lived. He became an icon. The Crow, the film that turned tragedy into immortality. After the tragedy, The Crow could have collapsed entirely. Studios considered shelving it. Investors backed away. Some crew members refused to return. But those who loved Brandon, including his fiancée Eliza and director Alex Proyas, insisted the film must be finished, not to profit, not to exploit, but to honor him. Through body doubles, early footage, and groundbreaking digital effects, they completed the movie that should have been Brandon's breakthrough. When The Crow premiered on May 13, 1994, audiences were stunned. Brandon didn't just act in the film, he lived inside it. Every frame pulsed with raw emotion. Grief, love, fury, beauty. His performance was haunting in a way no actor could intentionally craft. Critics called it a masterpiece of tragedy, a role he was born to play, a farewell no one was ready for. The movie became an instant cult classic, spawning sequels, television adaptations, comics, and generations of fans who saw Brandon not just as an actor, but as a mythic figure, the dark angel who gave everything to his final role. The cultural impact, a new kind of icon. Brandon's legacy stretched far beyond the film. He became a symbol of unrealized potential. Hollywood's great what if. His portrayal in The Crow influenced the visual language of dark comic book cinema, paving the way for Blade, The Matrix, The Dark Knight, and countless gritty anti-hero films. Fans across the world adopted the film's imagery. The black coat, the white face, the iconic makeup, all synonymous with Brandon's energy, not the character alone. Directors later admitted they studied Brandon's performance to craft their own dark protagonists. Musicians referenced him in their lyrics. Comic creators dedicated issues to him. Film schools teach The Crow as both a cinematic landmark and a cautionary tale. Very few actors leave that kind of imprint after a single leading role. The man remembered, Morris, not the myth. Those who knew Brandon personally refused to let him be defined only by his death. Friends describe him as gentle, introspective, funny, and fiercely loyal. Eliza remembered him as someone who believed deeply in kindness. Actors who worked with him said he was humble, always listening, never playing the Hollywood game. His mother, Linda Lee Cadwell, spent decades ensuring that both Bruce and Brandon were remembered not as cursed legends, but as human beings. Brilliant, flawed, compassionate. Brandon once said during an interview, "The meaning of life is that it ends. What matters is what you do before that happens." He did not know that his own ending was so near, but he lived with passion, conviction, and a desire to define himself, not inherit a story written by others. And in the end, he succeeded. The final parallel. Two legends, one legacy. Bruce Lee changed cinema. Brandon Lee changed Hollywood safety forever. Both were taken far too young. Both left behind mysteries that still provoke endless debate. Both became cultural icons whose influence continues decades later. But perhaps the most powerful part of Brandon's legacy is this. People no longer see him as Bruce Lee's son. They see him as who he truly was. Brandon Lee, the actor who gave the world one unforgettable performance, and in doing so became eternal. Conclusion. The story of Brandon Lee is a tragedy, yes, but it is also a testament to talent, to perseverance, to the fragility of life, and to the way a single moment can carve a legend into stone. He did not live long, but he lived deeply, and in the shimmering darkness of The Crow, he flies forever.